I was 12 feet from the courthouse steps when Cassidy Wren put both hands on Laurel Briggs and shoved. Laurel was 7 months pregnant. She went down hard. Papers flew everywhere. The kind of legal documents you don't want scattered on concrete steps in front of a dozen witnesses. Her hand caught the stone edge on the way down, and the red stain spread through her light blue dress before anyone moved. Cassidy was still screaming. Nobody stopped her. Not for the first 8 seconds. Yet not the attorneys on the steps, not the court clerk walking out, not the man in the gray suit who looked and then looked away. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Steady, unhurried, the way a man walks when he's already made up his mind. Cal Briggs had driven 3 hours from Clarksville that morning. What nobody in that parking lot knew, including Laurel, was that he'd already done the most important thing 3 weeks ago. My name is Marcus Webb. I've worked courthouse security at the Davidson County Courthouse in Nashville for 11 years. Before that, I did 8 years in the Army. 2 tours, came home to Tennessee, and found that standing at a door and watching people was something I was built for. Quiet work, observant work. The kind where you see everything and say very little. I've seen a lot on these steps. Divorce papers served in parking lots. People crying on benches before hearings. Oh, a man who sat on the bottom step for 45 minutes after a custody ruling and just stared at the sidewalk until his brother came and got him. I've seen anger, grief, the particular hollowness of people who came in hoping for something and didn't get it. I had never seen what I saw the morning Cassidy Wren put her hands on Laurel Briggs. I want to be clear about what I saw because I wrote it in my incident report that afternoon, and I stood by every word of it in the proceedings that followed. It was a Tuesday, early September, the tail end of Nashville's summer heat, the kind of morning where the air already feels used by 8 o'clock, heavy and close, the sun coming up hard off the limestone courthouse facade. Laurel Briggs arrived at 8:12. I know because I checked the security camera timestamp afterward. And at the time, I just noticed her the way I notice everyone. She was pregnant, obviously, and significantly so, moving carefully up the front walk with a canvas tote over one shoulder and a manila folder in her other hand. Light blue dress, brown hair down. She had the careful walk of a woman in her 3rd trimester who has learned to account for her own center of gravity. Her attorney, June Halstead, was already on the steps talking to a clerk. June is mid-40s, sharp, practical. I'm the kind of attorney who wears sensible heels and keeps her files in a specific order and doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need to. She'd been at this courthouse enough times that I knew her by name. June turned when she saw Laurel coming up the walk and said something I couldn't hear. Laurel nodded. They went up the steps together. I clocked them going inside at 8:15. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock. At 8:47, the red dress appeared. I noticed Cassidy Wren before she got to the steps. She came up the front walk fast, the way people walk when they're propelled by something internal rather than destination. Red dress, heels, hair done. She was in her late 20s, pretty in a way that she probably used, and she was angry in the particular way of someone who has been getting angrier since they woke up, and possibly since before that. She wasn't a party to the proceedings. She had no business at this courthouse that morning that I was aware of. I stepped forward from my position near the door. "Ma'am," I said, "can I help you?" "I'm here to see someone," she said. She didn't slow down. I moved into her path, not blocking, just present. "This is a courthouse. Hearings start at 9. If you're not a party to a case—" I said, "I'm here to see someone." Her eyes moved to the door behind me, looking for something. Or someone. My radio crackled. Yeah, I half turned to answer it. And in the 3 seconds my attention split, Laurel Briggs came back out through the courthouse doors. June had sent her to get something from the car, a document she'd left behind. I pieced this together later. It took Laurel maybe 4 minutes, down to the parking lot, into the car, back up the front walk. She came up the steps from below while Cassidy was standing near the top. I don't think Cassidy had planned it exactly. I don't think she'd driven to this courthouse with the specific intention of doing what she did. I think she saw Laurel coming up those steps, and something in her just cracked. She went down 2 steps. She got right in Laurel's face. I started moving. You think you're going to take everything? Cassidy's voice was high and tight. You think a baby gives you the right to take? Cassidy. Laurel's voice was low and controlled. The voice of someone who has had this energy directed at them before and has learned to stay very still inside it. I need you to step back. He doesn't want you. He's never coming back to. I need you to step back, Laurel said again. Same tone, same stillness. I was 6 feet away. Cassidy's hands came up. She shoved. Both palms, flat, center of Laurel's chest. Hard enough that Laurel went back and down and her heel caught the edge of the step rung, and she went sideways rather than straight back, her hand slamming into the stone corner on her way down, the manila folder and its contents going everywhere. White papers sailing, catching the morning air, floating down the steps and onto the concrete below. Laurel landed on her side on the courthouse steps. The red stain came up through the light blue fabric slowly, in blooming from where her hip had caught the stone edge. Cassidy stood over her, still talking. I don't remember exactly what she was saying. My attention had narrowed to the woman on the steps and the 32 weeks of pregnancy between her and the ground. I was already calling into my radio as I moved. June! I shouted over my shoulder toward the courthouse doors. June Halstead! I need June Halstead out here now. Behind me, I heard the courthouse door open. But the footsteps I heard were not June's. Heavier, slower. Coming from below, from the parking lot, not the building. I got to Laurel's side and crouched down. Don't move yet, I said. Just stay still. Her hand was pressed to the stone step, palm flat, steadying herself. The cut on her palm, where it had caught the edge, was bleeding into the grooves of the limestone. Her face was white under her summer color, her jaw tight, yet her eyes doing the rapid internal calculation of a woman trying to figure out if something is wrong with her body or just with her day. The baby, she started. Just stay still, I said. Help is coming. Cassidy was still on the steps above us, though something in her had registered what she'd done, and the register was starting to override the anger. I could see it in how her body language changed, the way her hands dropped, and her voice went uncertain. I didn't mean to. You need to step back, I said to her. Not loud, just clear. She stepped back, and into the space she left walked Cal Briggs. He came up the steps from the parking lot side, work boots, jeans, a collared shirt that he'd ironed himself. You could tell by the crease. He was 31, broad through the shoulders the way men get who work with their hands, with the same jaw as his brother Owen, and completely different eyes. Owen's eyes were always calculating. Cal's just looked at things. He'd told me later, when I talked to him after the hearing, when we sat outside in the shade of the live oak beside the courthouse, that he'd seen it happen from across the parking lot. He'd been walking up from his truck when Cassidy shoved Laurel. He said he stopped for about 2 seconds, not from indecision, from the specific stillness of a man processing something and making sure he processes it right. Then he came. He crouched beside Laurel on the other side from me. He didn't look at Cassidy. He didn't look at the scattered papers. He didn't look at the gathering crowd of courthouse visitors and attorneys who had frozen on the steps. He looked at Laurel. Hey, he said. Quiet. Like they were the only 2 people on those steps. Laurel looked at him. Something moved through her face. Not the relief of rescue. Laurel wasn't waiting to be rescued. Something more complicated than that. Something that looked like being seen by someone who already knew the whole story. Cal, she said. I've got you, he said. Can you sit up? She sat up carefully, hands still pressed flat on the stone beside her. Cal put one hand on her back and one on her arm, and was exactly as present as she needed, and exactly as quiet as she needed, and didn't do anything extra. June Halstead came through the courthouse doors at a speed I hadn't seen from her before. She took in the scene. Took in Laurel on the steps, took in the scattered papers, took in Cassidy standing 6 feet up with her hands at her sides and her face doing something complicated. June looked at me. Everything's documented, she said. Camera's been running the whole time, I said. I've already called it in. June nodded once. Then she looked at Cassidy with an expression that was not anger, something colder and more useful than anger. "I need you to understand," June said. "Nye, that you just assaulted a pregnant woman on the steps of a courthouse, in front of a security officer, on camera." She paused. "I don't know what you thought was going to happen today. But what's going to happen now is very different." Cassidy's mouth opened, closed. Cal helped Laurel to her feet. "The baby?" June said, already moving toward them. "I'm okay," Laurel said. Her voice was steady again, coming back. "I need to sit down. I need to—" She looked at Cal. The papers." "I've got the papers," I said. I'd already started gathering the documents from the steps below. Legal filings, copies of financial documents, a court-stamped cover sheet on top. I handed the stack back to June. Cal kept his hand on Laurel's arm as they went back inside. At the door, he finally turned and looked back at Cassidy, who was still standing on the steps, with the Nashville morning doing its humid, indifferent thing around her. He didn't say anything to her. He just looked at her for 3 seconds in the way of a man who has finished thinking about something and doesn't need to say it out loud. Then he went inside. I stood at the top of the steps with the courthouse camera running behind me and wrote the first lines of my incident report in the Notes app on my phone. And I thought about what Cal had said to Laurel just before they went inside, quiet enough that only I was close enough to hear it. "It's already done, Laurel. 3 weeks ago. It's already done." I didn't know what that meant yet. I found out inside that courtroom 90 minutes later. The courthouse paramedic was a woman named Diane. She came in 6 minutes after I called it in, compact, efficient, carrying her kit like she'd been doing this long enough that the weight of it was just part of her body. She set up in the small first-floor waiting room off the main corridor, and the one with the plastic chairs and the vending machine and the window that looks out at the parking lot. Laurel sat in the chair closest to the window. Cal sat one chair over, elbows on his knees, watching Diane work without getting in the way. June stood near the door with her phone, talking to someone in the low, precise voice she uses when she's managing something important and doesn't want the room to hear the urgency of it. I was in the doorway because I had no official reason to be inside, but also wasn't going anywhere. Diane checked Laurel's hand first. The cut from the stone edge was shallow, but had bled enough to look worse than it was. She cleaned it, closed it with 2 small butterfly strips, wrapped it lightly. Then she did what she needed to do for a pregnant woman who'd taken a fall. She asked the questions. She checked what she needed to check. She kept her voice even and informational throughout, the way good paramedics do, giving the patient something steady to hold on to while their body is still running on adrenaline. "The baby's moving," Laurel said at one point. Not to Diane specifically, just out loud. "Good," Diane said. "That's good. You're going to want to get checked properly after this. Today, not tomorrow." "The hearing's at 9, Laurel said. "I know. After the hearing." Diane looked at her directly. "Promise me that?" "Yes, ma'am," Laurel said. Something about hearing those words in Laurel's mouth, the automatic Southern deference, the yes, ma'am that comes out of Tennessee, women of a certain upbringing without thinking, made the room feel more human, more real. This wasn't a legal proceeding. This was a woman in a plastic chair in a fluorescent-lit waiting room, with a cut hand and 7 months of pregnancy and a hearing in 40 minutes. Diane packed up her kit. She said something to June on her way out that I didn't catch. June's expression didn't change, but she wrote something on the legal pad she'd been holding. The room went quieter. Cal got up and went to the vending machine. He studied it for a moment with the deliberate focus of a man who has given himself a task to do while he gets himself level. He bought a bottle of water and a package of peanut butter crackers and brought them back. He set them on the chair beside Laurel without comment. She looked at them, looked at him. "Hi, you drove 3 hours," she said. "Left at 5:30, he said. He sat back down in his chair. "Owen know you're here?" Cal's jaw moved once. "No," he said. Laurel absorbed that. She opened the water, drank some, set it on the chair arm. "Cal." She looked at him. "What did you mean? Out there? What's already done?" He looked at his hands for a moment. Large hands, the kind that have built and fixed and carried things. that there was a callus on his right palm that had been there so long it was just part of him now. "I wrote a statement," he said, "to the judge, 3 weeks ago." He kept his eyes on his hands. "June submitted it through her office. It's in the court file." Laurel was very still. "What kind of statement?" she said. "The true kind," he said. He looked up. "The kind that says what I saw. During the marriage. The things Owen did that his attorney is going to stand up in that room and tell the judge didn't happen." The vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. "Cal." Her voice had gone somewhere careful. "That's your brother." "I know who he is," Cal said. "I know what he's going to do," Cal said. "I decided I could live with that better than the other thing." Laurel looked at him for a long moment. Her hand, the wrapped one, moved to her stomach. The unconscious gesture of a pregnant woman grounding herself. "What's in it?" she said. "The statement." "Things I saw," he said. "Things he said to you in front of me that his attorney's going to say he never said. The night of your birthday, when he didn't come home, and I was the one who called you at 11 o'clock because I knew you were sitting there alone." He paused. "The conversation I had with him in November, when I told him what I thought of what he was doing, and he told me to stay out of it." Another pause. "I stayed out of it too long. I'm not doing that anymore." I was still in the doorway. I probably should have moved. This was a private conversation that a courthouse security guard had no business standing adjacent to. I didn't move. June came back in at 8:35. She had a different quality about her now. The low-level urgency was gone, and replaced with something more settled. The energy of a person who has confirmed that their preparation is solid and is now simply waiting for the moment to use it. She looked at Laurel. "How are you doing?" she said. "Ready," Laurel said. June's eyes moved to Cal. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "I need to go over a few things with you before we go in." "Yes, ma'am," Cal said. He stood up. I watched June walk him through something on her legal pad. Not the letter itself, but procedure. What would happen when the letter was introduced? What Owen's attorney would likely argue? What Cal might be asked if the judge allowed direct questioning? Cal listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions, both specific, both practical. June looked at him when they finished. "You understand what this does to your relationship with your brother," she said. Not gently, just factually. "Yes," Cal said. "And you're—" "I'm sure," he said. Before she could finish. I've been sure for 3 weeks." June looked at him for a moment, the way people look at someone when they're trying to assess the weight of their certainty. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said. "We go in at 8:50. I walked back to my post at the front door. The morning was in full swing now. Courthouse traffic picking up, attorneys and clients and witnesses and clerks moving in and out. The steps had been cleared. The papers were inside with June. The stone where Laurel had fallen was just stone again. Nothing to mark what had happened there, except what was in my incident report and on the security camera. Cassidy Wren was gone. I'd watched her walk to her car from my post after everything moved inside. She sat in the car for a while, long enough that I'd wondered if I was going to need to do something. Then she drove away. I filed my incident report at 8:45. It was detailed. It was accurate. I had the camera timestamp, my own account, Diane's preliminary medical notes that she'd shared with me for documentation purposes, and the specific sequence of events in the order they occurred. I'd done enough reports in 11 years to know what mattered and what didn't. What mattered here was the sequence, the intent, the specific physical action, and its consequence. I sent it to my supervisor and to courthouse administration. Then I added one more recipient on June Halstead's request, which she'd made quietly before going into the courtroom. The report went to Judge Patricia Sims's clerk. "I want to tell you about Owen Briggs, because you're going to want to understand who he is before I tell you what happened inside that courtroom." I'd seen him at previous hearings. Not many. This was only the second major proceeding in the case, but enough to have a read on him. He was 34, a decent looking in the way of men who were athletic in their 20s and still carry some of it. He wore his suits the way men wear them when suits are a statement rather than a habit. He smiled at the right people in the courthouse hallway. He was the kind of man who knew how to perform reasonableness. His attorney, a man named Fletcher Cross, was very good at the specific legal art of making a narrative. I'd seen him in this courthouse before, too. He was the kind of attorney who doesn't argue facts. He arranges them. He builds the picture he wants the judge to see and keeps building it until the picture looks like reality. The picture he'd been building about Laurel Briggs was of a woman who was unstable, emotional, difficult to manage, a woman whose pregnancy had compromised her judgment and whose attorney was exploiting the situation for financial gain. It was a coherent picture, and it had exactly zero relationship to the woman I'd watched handle a physical assault with controlled stillness on courthouse steps 20 minutes earlier. But pictures don't need to be true to be effective. They just need to be built well. Fletcher Cross had been building his for 3 months. What he hadn't accounted for was the letter sitting in the court file that his client's own brother had written. At 8:58, I watched June Halstead, Laurel Briggs, and Cal Briggs walk down the corridor toward courtroom 4. Cal walked beside Laurel, not in front of her, not behind, beside, the specific position of someone who is present without managing. At the courtroom door, Laurel stopped. She turned and looked at Cal. "Whatever happens in there," she said. "I know," he said. "Your brother is going to—" "Laurel." He said her name simply. "I know." She looked at him for a moment, the bandaged hand at her side, and the 7-month belly between them and everything that came after it. "Thank you," she said. He opened the courtroom door for her. They went in. I went back to my post, but I thought about those 2 words for the rest of the morning. Thank you. Not thank you for what you did. Not thank you for the letter, or thank you for driving 3 hours, or thank you for choosing me over your brother. Just thank you. Yet the way you say it to someone when the specific thing they did is too big to name, and you both know it. At 11:20, June Halstead came out of courtroom 4 and walked directly to my station by the front door. "Marcus," she said. "Ms. Halstead, the judge wants to speak with you." She paused. "About the incident report." I straightened up. "Now?" I said. "Now," she said. I followed her back down the corridor, toward courtroom 4, toward whatever was happening inside it. The courtroom 4 is not a large room. It seats maybe 60 people in the gallery and has the particular acoustic quality of a space where sound moves directly. Nothing gets lost, nothing gets softened. The wood paneling is dark, and the fluorescent lights overhead do what fluorescent lights do, which is make everything look slightly more serious than it already is. Judge Patricia Sims sat at the bench. She was 60, silver-haired, with the focused stillness of someone who has been reading people in this room for a long time and has developed very accurate instruments for doing it. She wore her reading glasses low on her nose and had a habit of looking over them when she wanted to see the room rather than the documents. She was looking over them when June brought me in. Owen was at the defendant's table with Fletcher Cross. He was in the navy suit he wore to every hearing. I recognized it. His posture was the controlled, unperformative calm of someone who has been coached on how to present in a courtroom and is working hard to execute the coaching. He did not look calm. His jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with the specific anger of a man who has been ambushed by something he didn't see coming. Cal was seated in the gallery, first row, on June's side. He was looking at the front of the room, not at Owen, not at Fletcher, just forward, steady, the way he'd walked up those courthouse steps. Owen had looked at his brother once, apparently, when Cal came in. I heard this from June afterward. She said Owen had looked at Cal the way you look at someone when you're trying to determine the extent of the damage. Cal had looked back, and then looked at the front of the room. And that was that. Laurel was at the plaintiff's table beside June's empty chair, her wrapped hand flat on the table in front of her, and her back straight in the specific way of a woman who is not going to let this room see her anything other than steady. Judge Sims looked at me over her glasses when I came in. "Officer Webb," she said. "Your Honor," I said, "I've read your incident report." She held it up briefly. 2 pages, my handwriting converted to print by the courthouse system. "I have some questions." "Yes, Your Honor." She asked me to describe what I witnessed on the courthouse steps in my own words and in sequence. I did. I'm trained to give factual accounts, and I gave one: the timeline, the specific actions, the physical contact, the fall, the injury. No interpretation, no editorial, just what I saw in the order I saw it. Fletcher Cross objected twice during my account. Judge Sims overruled him both times without looking up from the notes she was taking. When I finished, she asked 3 specific questions. First, was there any physical provocation from Laurel Briggs prior to the contact? "No, Your Honor." Second, did the individual in the red dress, she didn't use Cassidy's name, make any attempt to render assistance after the fall? "No, Your Honor." She remained standing above Ms. Briggs. Third, is the security camera footage available for court review? "Yes, Your Honor. I submitted the timestamp and access code to your clerk this morning, along with my report." Judge Sims looked over her glasses at Fletcher Cross. He was writing something on his legal pad with the focused energy of a man buying himself time to think. "Mr. Cross," she said, "do you have any questions for Officer Webb?" Fletcher looked up. He had the practiced composure of a man who has been in difficult courtroom moments before and knows how to keep his face from showing the difficulty. "Officer Webb," he said, "in your assessment, was the contact on the courthouse steps planned or spontaneous?" "I don't assess intent," I said. "Nay, I document what I observe. But in your experience, Mr. Cross." Judge Sims's voice was patient and absolute. "Officer Webb documents. He doesn't assess intent. Move on or release him." Fletcher looked at his legal pad. "No further questions," he said. Judge Sims thanked me. I took a seat in the gallery on June's side, 2 rows behind Cal. The letter came in 20 minutes later. June had been building toward it methodically, laying the foundation the way good attorneys do, establishing context before the document, so that when the document arrives, the room already knows what to do with it. She'd introduced financial records. She'd submitted the incident report formally. She'd walked Judge Sims through a timeline of the marriage that was specific and documented at every point. Then she said, "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Plaintiff's Exhibit 14, a voluntary witness statement submitted to this court 3 weeks ago by Calvin Briggs. I'm brother of the defendant." The room changed, not loudly, not with any dramatic shift in the air or the light, just the specific human change of a space where something unexpected has entered and everyone in it is recalibrating simultaneously. Fletcher Cross was on his feet before June finished the sentence. "Objection, Your Honor. This statement was submitted outside of normal discovery procedure, and the defense had no opportunity to—" "Mr. Cross." Judge Sims was already reading the cover page. "Or the statement was submitted through proper channels 3 weeks ago and entered into the court file at that time. Your office received notification." She looked up. "Did your office receive notification?" A pause. "We may have received a filing notification," Fletcher said carefully. "However, the defense was not given adequate time to—" "3 weeks is adequate time, counsel." She looked back at the document. "Objection overruled. Continue, Ms. Halstead." I watched Owen. His head had turned toward Cal the moment June said Calvin Briggs. Not quickly, slowly, the way a person turns when they're trying to control the turn. Cal was looking at the front of the room. He didn't turn back. June read portions of the letter aloud. "I'm not going to give you all of it, because some of it belongs to Laurel, and some of it belongs to Cal, and not all of it is mine to carry out of that courtroom. But I'll tell you what I heard." Cal wrote about a specific evening in February, 8 months before the hearing. He'd been at Owen and Laurel's house in East Nashville for a family dinner, the regular Sunday thing the Briggs family did, pot roast and the good rolls their mother used to make, the television on in the background. He wrote that Owen had spoken to Laurel in front of him in a way that Cal had chosen to dismiss at the time. He wrote the specific words Owen had used. He wrote that he'd told himself It was a bad night, and let it go. Yet he wrote that he shouldn't have let it go. He wrote about her birthday in April, about calling her at 11 o'clock because Owen wasn't home, and he knew she was alone, and he told her he was just checking in, which was a lie. He was checking on her because he'd seen enough by then to know he should. He wrote about the conversation he'd had with Owen in November, 2 months after Owen left. He'd driven to Nashville specifically for that conversation. He'd told his brother what he thought. And Owen had told him it was none of his business, and that Laurel had been difficult for years, and that Cal didn't know the full picture. Cal wrote, "I know the full picture. I've been watching it for 3 years. I stayed quiet because he's my brother. I'm not staying quiet anymore because she's carrying my niece or nephew, and the truth of what happened in that marriage matters for that child's life." He wrote, "I am not writing this to hurt my brother. I'm writing it because a judge is going to make decisions about a child's life, and those decisions should be made on accurate information. This is accurate information." The courtroom was very quiet while June read. Fletcher Cross wrote on his legal pad and did not look up. Owen's right hand was flat on the table in front of him. His left was in his lap. I could see the tension in his right hand from 2 rows back, the specific, locked stillness of a fist that's not making itself a fist. No, Laurel was looking at the table. Her wrapped hand had moved to her stomach. Fletcher Cross went after the letter hard. He was good at this, at the art of taking something credible and constructing doubt around its edges. He argued bias. He argued that Cal had a complicated relationship with his brother and that the statement reflected personal grievance rather than factual account. He argued that the specific incidents Cal described were one-sided characterizations of normal marital conflict. Yet he was thorough and professional, and it was genuinely good legal work. Judge Sims listened to all of it without expression. Then she said, "Mr. Cross, is there anything in this statement that your client disputes factually?" Fletcher paused. "My client disputes the characterization of—" "Factually," Judge Sims said. "Does your client dispute that the February dinner occurred?" "No, Your Honor." "Does your client dispute that he was not home on the evening of Ms. Briggs's birthday in April?" A longer pause. "No, Your Honor." "Does your client dispute that he had a conversation with his brother in November in which the brother expressed these concerns?" Fletcher looked at Owen. Owen looked at the table. "No, Your Honor," Fletcher said. Judge Sims made a note. "Then we're not disputing facts," she said. "We're disputing interpretation." She looked at Fletcher over her glasses. "I'll do my own interpreting, counsel. That's what I'm here for." She set the letter down. She looked at the room. Something had shifted in the atmosphere. Not dramatically. Judge Sims didn't do dramatic. But the air had a different weight than it had 40 minutes ago. Like a balance that has been tipping slowly, finally finding its new position. Fletcher said, "Your Honor, the defense would like to call—" "We'll take a 15-minute recess," Judge Sims said. "So I want to review Plaintiff's Exhibit 14 in full before we continue." She stood. Everyone stood. She walked to her chambers with the letter in her hand. In the 15-minute recess, the courtroom rearranged itself. Fletcher Cross went to Owen immediately, and they had a conversation in the low, urgent register of attorney-client privilege. I couldn't hear it. I didn't need to. Owen's body language was enough. The stiffness in his shoulders, the way he kept his back to the gallery. The single moment when he turned and looked at Cal across the room. Cal was standing near the gallery railing. He met Owen's eyes. I watched whatever passed between them. It wasn't anger, it wasn't apology. It was something older and harder than either. The look of 2 men who grew up in the same house and are standing on opposite sides of something that can't be undone, and both of them know it. Owen looked away first. He turned back to Fletcher. Cal sat back down. I was 2 rows behind him. I could see the set of his shoulders. Steady, but not easy. The steadiness of someone who has made a hard choice and is living inside the consequences of it in real time. His hands were on his knees, not clenched, just resting there, like he'd put them somewhere, and was letting them be still. Laurel was at the plaintiff's table with June. June was talking. Laurel was listening with the focused attention of a woman taking in exactly what she needed to take in and filing it precisely. She hadn't looked at Owen since the letter was read. Not once. That was its own kind of thing. I went to the water fountain in the corridor during the recess. I was standing there when I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Cal. He got a drink, stood back up, looked at the corridor wall for a moment. "You doing okay?" I asked. It wasn't a professional question. It was just what came out. He looked at me. "You were on the steps this morning," he said. "So yes, sir." "She didn't do anything to provoke it," he said, not defensively, just making sure I knew. "I know," I said. "That's what my report says." He nodded. We stood in the corridor for a moment. The courthouse moved around us, a clerk going past with a cart, someone's phone going off and being quickly silenced, the specific institutional hum of a building that processes human situations continuously and doesn't take breaks. "The letter," I said. "When did you decide to write it?" He thought about it. "I decided in November," he said, "when I talked to Owen and he told me I didn't know the full picture." He looked at the wall. "I've known Laurel for 6 years. I was at their wedding. I've had Sunday dinner at their house more times than I can count." He paused. "I knew the full picture." "What made you wait 3 weeks before submitting it?" He looked at me. "I wanted to be sure I was writing it for the right reason," he said. "Not because I was angry at Owen. Not because of how things looked." He paused. "Because it was true, and because it mattered." The recess bell sounded from inside the courtroom. We went back in. Judge Sims came back from her chambers at 10:47. She sat down. She placed the letter in front of her. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the bench beside it. That was the first thing I noticed. The glasses off. In 11 years of watching judges in this building, I have learned that reading glasses off means the reading is done. It means the judge has formed a view and is now going to use her eyes for the room rather than the page. The room felt it too. The particular collective stillness of 60 people who don't know each other but are all paying attention to the same thing. "Mr. Cross," Judge Sims said, "you wanted to call a witness." Fletcher stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Owen Briggs." Owen stood, buttoned his jacket, walked to the witness stand with the deliberate posture of a man executing a plan. He sat down, was sworn in, settled his hands on the railing in front of him. He looked composed. He looked like a man who had spent 3 months preparing for this room and was ready to perform his preparation. Fletcher began. He walked Owen through the marriage history first. The early years, the good ones, the version that was genuinely true and genuinely warm, and that Laurel herself would probably not have disputed. Owen talked about how they'd met, about buying the East Nashville house, about the first years when things were good. He was good at this. His voice was steady, and his answers were specific enough to sound unscripted without being loose enough to create problems. Then Fletcher shifted. "Mr. Briggs, your wife's attorney has submitted a statement from your brother Calvin. Were you aware your brother had written this statement?" Owen's jaw moved once. "No," he said. "I was not." "And the incidents described in the statement, the February dinner, the April birthday, the November conversation, do you dispute that these events occurred?" "I don't dispute that they occurred," Owen said. "I dispute the way they've been characterized." "Can you explain what you mean?" Owen looked at the judge. Direct, practiced eye contact. "Well, my brother and I have always had a complicated relationship," he said. "Cal has. He's always been more comfortable taking Laurel's side, even before the separation. And I think what happened here is that he's taken genuinely normal moments in a marriage and described them in the most negative possible light, because that's the lens he's been using. Smooth, organized, credible sounding." I watched Cal in the gallery. He was looking at the front of the room. His expression hadn't changed. But his right hand, which had been resting flat on his knee, had closed very slightly. Not a fist, just a change. The kind you only catch if you're watching closely. Fletcher moved to the separation. He walked Owen through a version of events that was constructed and plausible, and that placed the responsibility for the marriage's failure on what Owen called irreconcilable differences in values and direction. He didn't say Cassidy's name. He didn't need to. He kept the testimony clean and abstract, the way good attorneys keep things when the specific facts don't help their case. Then he arrived at custody. Mr. Briggs, you've requested joint custody with primary residential placement. Can you explain your reasoning? Owen leaned forward slightly. My child deserves to have a father who is present, he said. I've been present my entire life. I want to be present for this child's life. She's a good mother. I believe that. But the picture that's been painted of me in these proceedings is not accurate, and I don't think major decisions about my child's life should be made based on inaccurate information. He said inaccurate information with the specific weight of a man who has just watched his brother's letter read into the record and is repackaging his response to it in real time. Plausible, organized, performing reasonableness exactly the way he'd been coached. Judge Sims was watching him with the reading glasses still off. Fletcher said, "Nothing further, Your Honor." June stood. June Halstead cross-examines the way she does everything, without drama, without elevation, with the specific patience of someone who knows exactly where they're going and doesn't need to signal it in advance. She started with the February dinner. Mr. Briggs, in your brother's statement, he describes specific words you used to address your wife at the dinner table in February. He quotes you directly. She looked at her notes. He writes that you said, in front of him, that Laurel should, and I'm quoting the statement here, learn to be in a room without making it about herself. Do you recall saying that? Owen's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. I may have said something like that, he said, in the context of a specific disagreement. Out of context, it sounds... I'm not asking for context yet, June said pleasantly. I'm asking if you recall saying it. I recall something along those lines. Thank you. She made a note. Your brother also states that on your wife's birthday in April, you were not home at 11 o'clock at night. Is that accurate? I was working late that evening. I had a client situation that... Is it accurate that you were not home at 11 o'clock on your wife's birthday? A pause. Yes, Owen said. And you were aware it was her birthday? Yes. And your wife was pregnant at this time? She was in her first trimester. She was pregnant, June said. Not a question. Just confirmation placed into the record. Owen looked at his hands. Yes, he said. June moved to the November conversation. Your brother drove from Clarksville to Nashville, specifically to have a conversation with you about his concerns regarding your behavior in the marriage. Is that accurate? That's his characterization of why he came. Did he drive from Clarksville to Nashville? Yes. And did he express concerns to you about your behavior? Owen's composure did something. Not broke. Owen wasn't going to break in this room, but shifted. The smooth surface developed a texture. He expressed his opinions, Owen said. His concerns, June said. His opinions. June looked at him for a moment. Mr. Briggs, she said, your brother drove 3 hours to tell you he was worried. And you're in this room today, calling it opinions. Fletcher was on his feet. Objection. Argumentative. Withdrawn, June said smoothly. She looked at her notes. One more area, Your Honor. She looked up at Owen. This morning, at approximately 8:47, an incident occurred on the courthouse steps involving your wife and a woman named Cassidy Wren. Are you aware of this incident? Something went through Owen's face. Fast. I contained. But there. I became aware of it this morning, he said. Ms. Wren is someone you have a personal relationship with? That's correct. And she appeared at this courthouse this morning, uninvited, approached your pregnant wife on the courthouse steps, and made physical contact that resulted in your wife falling. Fletcher. Objection, Your Honor. This characterization of events... The incident report is already in evidence, Mr. Cross, Judge Sims said. Or overruled. June looked at Owen. Your wife fell on courthouse steps this morning, she said. She is 7 months pregnant. She has a cut on her hand that required medical attention. She paused. Do you have anything to say about that? Owen's jaw was very tight now. I wasn't there, he said. No, June said. You weren't. She sat down. Judge Sims looked at Owen for a moment. Then she did something I hadn't seen her do in the proceedings so far. She turned to the gallery. She looked at Cal. Mr. Calvin Briggs, she said. Cal sat up slightly. Your Honor, he said, you submitted a voluntary statement to this court 3 weeks ago. Yes, Your Honor. Without being subpoenaed, without being asked. Yes, Your Honor. And you drove from Clarksville this morning to be present. Yes, Your Honor. She looked at him for a moment, with the reading glasses still on the bench beside her. I have one question for you, she said. And I want you to understand you don't have to answer. You're in the gallery, not the stand. But I'm going to ask it. Cal nodded. Your brother is sitting at that table, Judge Sims said. You've known him your whole life. You drove 3 hours to write a statement that contradicts the narrative his legal team has been building for 3 months. She paused. What do you want this court to understand that isn't in the letter? The courtroom was completely quiet. Fletcher Cross opened his mouth. Judge Sims held up one hand without looking at him. He closed it. Cal was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of a man who has been asked a real question by someone who actually wants the real answer. I want the court to understand that I love my brother, he said. His voice was steady and plain. And that I'm here because of that, not in spite of it. He paused. A person can love someone and still tell the truth about what they did. I think those things have to be able to exist at the same time, or the truth never gets told about anything. He looked at the front of the room. I wrote what I wrote because that child... He stopped. His jaw worked once. That child is going to grow up and have a sense of who their father is, based partly on what this court decides. And I needed that to be based on what actually happened. He looked at his hands. That's what I want the court to understand. The room was still. Judge Sims looked at Cal for a long moment. Then she put her reading glasses back on. She picked up her pen. We'll take the lunch recess, she said, back at 1:30. I went outside during the lunch recess. I sat on the side steps, not the front, not where it happened, and ate the sandwich I'd brought from home and watched Nashville do its midday thing. The traffic on the avenue, the heat coming up off the asphalt, a group of attorneys walking to a restaurant 2 blocks away. At 12:15, Cal came out and sat on the step below me. He had a paper cup of coffee from the courthouse vending machine. He drank it and looked at the street. The judge's question, I said. Were you ready for that? No, he said. You answered it well. He looked at the traffic. I meant it, he said. I know, I said. We sat there for a while. The heat was significant. A pigeon did something purposeful near the bottom of the steps, and then changed its mind. Just Owen's going to contest the letter, Cal said. Not asking, just stating what he knew was coming. Probably, I said. Fletcher's going to spend the afternoon trying to build a case that I have a personal grievance. That this is about my relationship with Owen rather than the truth. Probably, I said. Cal looked at his coffee cup. Does he have a personal grievance? I asked. It was a real question, the kind I don't usually ask, but that the morning had made feel necessary. Cal thought about it honestly. Yeah, he said. Some. He turned the cup in his hands. Owen and I have had our issues. He's always been the one my parents built the story around, and I've always been the one standing next to the story. He paused. But I wrote that letter the way I wrote it, because I checked my own motives 20 times before I submitted it. I asked myself every time whether what I was writing was true, and whether I was writing it because it was true or because I was angry. He looked at the street. Every time the answer was the same. It's true, and it needed to be said. And the anger? The anger is there, he said. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but it's not why I wrote the letter. I know the difference. A cab went by. Someone honked twice, short, the Nashville midday traffic doing its thing. You know what's strange? Cal said. What? When I walked up those steps this morning and I saw what Cassidy did. He stopped, looked at his coffee. My first thought wasn't about Laurel. It wasn't about the hearing or the letter or any of it. He paused. My first thought was about Owen, about the fact that the woman he left his pregnant wife for just assaulted her on courthouse steps. His jaw moved. I felt sorry for him, for a second, before everything else. He shook his head. That's a strange thing to feel. I looked at him. "It's not strange," I said. "He's your brother." Cal finished his coffee, crushed the cup once in his hand, stood up. "Yeah," he said. "He is." He went back inside. I sat on the courthouse steps in the Nashville heat and thought about what it cost to tell the truth about someone you love. Not the dramatic version of that cost, not the courtroom confrontation or the legal proceedings. The actual cost. Yeah, the one that lives in your chest when you're sitting on a courthouse step at lunchtime drinking bad vending machine coffee. The one that doesn't go away when the gavel comes down. The one you carry regardless of how it turns out. The afternoon session started at 1:34, 4 minutes late, which in Judge Sims's courtroom was unusual enough that the room noticed. She came in with the letter in her hand again and a different legal pad than the one she'd been using in the morning. Like she'd started a new page of thinking. She sat. Everyone sat. "Mr. Cross," she said, "you indicated before the recess that the defense wished to address the voluntary statement further." Fletcher stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to recall Owen Briggs briefly, and then we'd like to address the court regarding the context and credibility of the statement submitted by Calvin Briggs." "You may proceed." Owen went back to the stand. Fletcher kept it short this time. He walked Owen through 3 specific incidents he'd prepared. Moments where Cal and Owen had been in conflict, predating the marriage entirely. A dispute over their father's estate when their parents divorced. A period of several years where the brothers hadn't spoken. A business disagreement 3 years back that had ended badly. He was building the picture. Cal as a man with a grudge that ran deep and long. It was effective. I watched the room take it in and felt the weight of it. The way a credible alternative narrative always has weight, even when you've seen the thing it's trying to explain away. Owen's voice was steadier in this second round. He'd used the recess. He was back in his lane. June's cross was brief. "Mr. Briggs, despite the conflicts your attorney described, your brother was at your wedding." "Yes." "He's been at Sunday dinners at your house regularly for 6 years." "Yes." "He drove from Clarksville to tell you he was worried about your behavior in your marriage." "He drove from Clarksville," Owen said. "I've already addressed why I think—" "He drove 3 hours," June said. "People who hold grudges don't usually drive 3 hours to express concern about someone's marriage. They don't usually do it at all." She paused. Nothing further." Owen stepped down. Fletcher Cross moved to his second point. He addressed the court directly. No witnesses. Just Fletcher and his legal pad, and the argument he'd been constructing through the lunch recess. He argued that the letter was a product of a fractured sibling relationship. He argued that Cal's presence at the courthouse this morning, uninvited, unsubpoenaed, suggested a level of personal investment that should give the court pause. He argued that the incidents described in the letter were real, but mischaracterized, and that the court should weigh them accordingly. He was thorough. He was professional. And then he said something that changed the temperature of the room. "Your Honor, we'd also note that Calvin Briggs made a statement in open court this morning, at the court's invitation, that was not under oath, was not subject to cross-examination, and that expressed what amounts to a personal philosophy rather than factual testimony." Fletcher paused. "The defense would ask that the court weight that statement accordingly, as the opinion of a man who has chosen a side in a family dispute, and dress that choice in the language of principle." The room was quiet. I looked at Cal. He was looking at Fletcher Cross. His face was still, but his hands had changed, both of them now, on his knees, not fists, just changed. And the stillness of a man absorbing something that has landed close enough to matter. Judge Sims was writing. She didn't look up for a long moment. When she did, she looked at Fletcher. "Mr. Cross," she said, "every person who walks into a courtroom has chosen a side in some sense. Witnesses choose to testify or not. Family members choose to speak or stay quiet." She paused. "In my experience, the more interesting question is not whether someone has chosen a side. It's why they chose it and what it cost them to do so." She looked back at her notes. "I'll weigh the statement as I see fit." Fletcher sat down. Something had gone out of him. Not his professionalism, That was intact, but the certainty, the sense that the picture he'd been building all day, was still coherent. It wasn't, and I think he knew it. June called one final witness, a woman named Teresa Briggs, Owen's mother. I hadn't seen her in the gallery, because she'd been seated at the far end of a middle row, which I'd passed without registering her. She was 63, small, with gray-streaked hair pulled back and the kind of face that has absorbed a lot over a long life and shows it quietly. She wore a navy blue cardigan over a floral blouse. She carried her purse on her forearm the way older Southern women do, as if setting it down requires a decision. Owen's posture changed the moment her name was called. Fletcher was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, the defense was not notified of this witness." "Ms. Halstead," Judge Sims said. "Teresa Briggs was listed as a potential witness in our original filing 6 weeks ago, Your Honor," June said. "She was disclosed according to procedure." Judge Sims looked at Fletcher. "She was disclosed," he said carefully. "However, we were given to understand she would not be called." "Attorneys are not bound by informal understandings about witness lists, Mr. Necross," Judge Sims said. "Objection overruled. Ms. Briggs, please come forward." Teresa Briggs walked to the witness stand slowly, not with infirmity, with the particular deliberateness of a woman who has decided something and is moving toward it at her own pace. She sat down. She looked at the courtroom. She looked at Owen. He was looking at her with an expression I couldn't fully read from the gallery. Something between a plea and a warning, or the look of a son trying to communicate something across a room. Teresa looked away from him, toward June. June was gentle with her, not condescending. Gentle in the way you are with someone who is doing something hard and you want to make the doing of it as clean as possible. She asked Teresa about the marriage, about what she'd observed over 6 years of Sunday dinners and family gatherings and the ordinary accumulated moments of watching two people build a life. Yet Teresa answered in the careful, considered way of someone who has rehearsed not just what to say, but how to say it true. She talked about Laurel, about the first time Owen brought her home, and the way Teresa had watched her move through the kitchen like she already knew where everything was, comfortable without being presumptuous. About the years after, the way Laurel showed up for family things consistently, the way she'd been the one to call Teresa when Owen's uncle passed, the way she'd driven Teresa to a medical appointment once without being asked because Owen had forgotten. She talked about her sons, about Owen's gifts, his ambition, his intelligence, the way he could walk into a room and make people believe in what he was saying. She talked about these things honestly, without diminishment. And then she talked about what she'd watched change. Her voice didn't waver. She'd clearly decided it wasn't going to waver, and she had the kind of quiet determination that made decisions like that stick. She talked about noticing Laurel going careful around Owen, the specific carefulness of a woman measuring her words before she said them. She talked about a Christmas gathering 2 years ago where Laurel had made a small joke, and Owen had looked at her in a way that made everyone at the table go quiet for a moment, including Teresa. She said, "I know my son. I love my son. I raised him, and I know what he is at his best." She paused. "I also know what he's capable of when he doesn't think anyone important is watching." The room was very quiet. Owen was looking at the table. "And Cal?" June asked. "Your younger son. He submitted a statement to this court. Were you aware he was going to do that?" "He told me," Teresa said. "About a month ago. He called me." "What did you say?" Teresa folded her hands in her lap. "I told him I thought it was right," she said, "and that it was going to be hard. And that I'd be here." June nodded. "Nothing further, Your Honor." Fletcher's cross-examination of Teresa Briggs was the most careful thing I watched him do all day. He understood what he was facing. You don't go after a 63-year-old mother in a family court proceeding without understanding the risk of how it reads. He was measured. He asked about the limitations of her observations. She wasn't in the home daily. She saw Owen and Laurel in family contexts, not private ones. He asked whether it was possible she was viewing her son through the lens of the family conflict, rather than objectively. Teresa listened to every question. She answered each one directly and without agitation. At the end, Fletcher asked, "Mrs. Briggs, do you love your son Owen?" "Yes," she said. Very much." "And you're aware that your testimony today may significantly impact his case?" "Yes," she said. "And you chose to testify anyway?" "Yes," she said. She looked at Fletcher with the steady eyes of a woman who has made peace with her decision. "I raised my boys to tell the truth, even when it cost something. I didn't think I could ask that of them without doing it myself." Fletcher looked at his legal pad. "Nothing further," he said. Teresa stepped down. She walked back to her seat in the gallery. She did not look at Owen, but when she passed the row where Cal was sitting, she put her hand on his shoulder for exactly 3 seconds. Just that. 3 seconds. Then she went to her seat. The afternoon light had shifted by the time the final arguments were made. Nashville. September at 3:30. The heat outside was still full, but the light through the courthouse's high windows had gone from white to gold. The specific late afternoon quality that makes even fluorescent-lit rooms feel like the day is winding down towards something. Fletcher Cross made his closing argument efficiently and without the earlier smoothness. Something had gone out of his case, and he knew it. He kept to the facts he still had: Owen's financial stability, his professional record, his stated desire to be present in his child's life. He kept away from the letter and Teresa's testimony as much as he could. Which meant his argument had 2 significant holes in it, where the morning's events should have been. June was brief. She said, "Your Honor, what this court has before it today is not a complicated case dressed in complex language. A pregnant woman was physically assaulted on courthouse steps this morning by her husband's companion. Her husband's own brother drove 3 hours to submit a voluntary statement about what he witnessed in this marriage, because he decided his niece or nephew deserved to have the truth on the record. The defendant's own mother testified to what she observed." She paused. "The court has everything it needs to make a decision that reflects what actually happened in this marriage and what environment this child will be raised in." She sat down. Judge Sims was quiet for a moment. She looked at her notes. She looked at the letter. She looked at the room. And then something happened that I have turned over in my mind many times since. Owen Briggs turned in his chair, not toward the judge, not toward Fletcher Cross, toward the gallery, toward Cal. His brother was looking at the front of the room. He didn't see Owen turn. Or maybe he did, and he chose not to register it. I couldn't tell. Owen looked at Cal for about 5 seconds. I've tried to read those 5 seconds since. I'm not sure I can do it accurately from the outside. But what I saw in Owen's face in that moment was not the anger I'd expected, not the performance of calm, not the managed composure he'd been maintaining all day. It was something older and more private than any of that. Something that looked, and I want to be careful here because I only saw it for 5 seconds, like a man looking at his brother and understanding, maybe for the first time all the way through, and the full weight of what his brother had done for him by telling the truth. Not done against him. For him. The truth on the record. For the child who was coming. Owen turned back to the front of the room. He put both hands flat on the table. He said something to Fletcher that I couldn't hear. Fletcher went very still. He wrote something on his legal pad. He stood up. "Your Honor," Fletcher said, "the defense would like to request a brief recess to confer with my client." Judge Sims looked at the clock. "You have 10 minutes," she said. In those 10 minutes, I watched through the courtroom's small side window as Fletcher and Owen stood in the corridor. I couldn't hear them. I watched Owen's body language shift in a way I hadn't seen all day. The performance posture gone, the shoulders dropping, the jaw unlocking. Fletcher was talking. Owen was listening. Then Owen was talking and Fletcher was listening. Then Owen nodded once. Slow, definitive, the kind of nod that ends a conversation. They came back in. Owen sat down. He looked at Laurel. For the first time all day, directly. She was looking at the table in front of her. She didn't see it. Maybe that was okay. Maybe it wasn't for her to see yet. Judge Sims came back to the bench. "Mr. Cross," she said, "you requested a recess to confer. Are you ready to continue?" Fletcher stood. "Sash, Your Honor," he said. "The defense would like to advise the court that the defendant has agreed to withdraw his current custody petition and enter into good faith negotiation with the plaintiff's attorney regarding a joint custody arrangement." He paused. "The defendant would like the record to reflect that this decision is made freely and voluntarily." Judge Sims looked at Fletcher, then at Owen, then at Laurel. Laurel had looked up. Her hand was on her stomach. In her eyes were doing something complicated and controlled. The effort of a woman who will not let this room see what she's feeling until she's had time to feel it privately. "Ms. Halstead," Judge Sims said, "is your client willing to enter into good faith negotiation?" June looked at Laurel. Laurel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," June said. Judge Sims made a note. The pen on the paper was the loudest sound in the room. The courtroom emptied slowly. And that's how it always goes after something significant. People don't rush out the way they do after routine hearings. They gather their things deliberately, like they need the extra 30 seconds to finish processing what they just witnessed. Fletcher Cross packed his briefcase with the efficient movements of a man concluding a professional engagement. He shook Owen's hand, said something brief, walked out without looking at the gallery. June was at the plaintiff's table, talking to Laurel in a low voice, going through next steps, dates, procedures, the mechanics of what good faith negotiation actually looked like in Davidson County Family Court. Practical things. The kind of things you need when the emotional gravity of a room is still working on you, and you need something concrete to hold. Teresa Briggs was in the gallery waiting, not moving toward anyone, just waiting, her purse on her forearm, giving people the space they needed. Cal was still in his seat. Owen stood at the defendant's table for a moment after Fletcher left. He straightened his jacket. He looked at his hands. He looked at the front of the room where Judge Sims had been sitting. Then he looked at Cal. Cal was looking at him. They held it for a long moment, two brothers across a courtroom that had spent the last 6 hours containing the full weight of their family's truth. Owen walked toward the gallery railing. "Sure," he stopped in front of Cal. "I was close enough to hear." Owen didn't say anything for a moment. He looked like a man who had prepared for every version of this day except the one that actually happened. Every script he'd been running had a different ending than this one, and he was standing in the real ending without a version of himself, ready for it. "You could have called me," he said finally, "before you wrote it. You could have told me what you were going to do." Cal looked at him. Would you have listened?" he said. Owen was quiet. "I don't know," he said, honest. The first fully honest thing I'd heard from him all day. Cal nodded slowly. Like that answer was enough. Like he'd already known it and wasn't angry about it anymore. Just confirmed. "She's having your kid, Owen," Cal said. "Whatever happened between you two, whatever you think the right version of this story is, she's having your kid in 2 months. He paused. I needed that child's life to start with the truth on the record. Not your truth, not her truth, just what actually happened. Owen looked at the courtroom floor. Dark wood, worn in the center where attorneys have walked for decades. "I wasn't always—" He stopped. "I know," Cal said. "You weren't always. That's true. The way it got characterized in that letter is accurate," Cal said. "Not hard, not angry, just level. I wrote what I saw. I checked it 20 times. It's accurate." Owen's jaw moved. "It's going to follow me," he said. "That letter, whatever I do going forward. People are going to—" "Owen," Cal leaned forward slightly. "The only thing that follows you is what you do next. That's it." He paused. "You withdrew the petition. That was the right thing. Whatever made you do it, that was the right thing." Owen looked at him. Something in his face shifted. The performance posture that had been reconstructed after the recess finally let go entirely. Yet what was underneath it was just a man in his mid-30s who had made a series of decisions that had led him to a Davidson County courtroom on a September afternoon, facing the consequences in front of his brother and his mother, and a judge who had read his own words back to him. "I saw her face," Owen said quietly, "when Cross announced the withdrawal. Laurel's face." He paused. "I haven't looked at her directly in 3 months. Tonight I've been looking past her or through her in every proceeding because it was easier. He looked at his hands. Today I looked at her. When I turned around, another pause. She looked so tired, Cal. She looked so... He stopped. Yeah, Cal said. They stood there for a moment. Two men in an emptying courtroom, carrying the specific weight of a family that was changing shape and couldn't go back to what it was. The baby, Owen said. Yeah, Cal said. I need to do right by the baby. I know you do, Cal said. I'm going to need... Owen stopped, started again. I'm going to need someone to tell me when I'm getting it wrong, going forward. I'm going to need... I know, Cal said. Owen looked at him. Are you still... He couldn't finish the sentence. Yeah, Cal said. I'm still your brother. Owen nodded. Once. The way he'd nodded at Fletcher in the corridor, slow, definitive, but different. The nod of a man receiving something rather than concluding something. He straightened up. He walked toward the door. He stopped when he reached Teresa. His mother looked at him with the eyes of a woman who has loved someone through the worst version of themselves and is still standing there. Owen put his arms around her. She held him. I looked away. Some things are not for witnesses. I found Laurel and June in the small waiting room off the main corridor. We're the same room where Diane had treated Laurel's hand that morning. Same plastic chairs, same vending machine, same window looking out at the parking lot where the afternoon light was now doing the long gold thing that Nashville September does at 4 o'clock. June was on her phone. Laurel was sitting in the same chair she'd sat in that morning, both hands in her lap, looking at the window. I knocked on the open door. She looked up. How's the hand? I said. She looked at the bandage. He flexed it carefully. Okay, she said. Still have to get it properly looked at. Diane said today, I reminded her. I know, she said. June's already called ahead. I nodded, stayed in the doorway. I had no particular reason to be there, except that I'd been present for this whole day, and leaving without checking felt wrong. You doing okay? I asked. She looked at the window. Ask me tomorrow, she said. Fair enough, I said. I was about to go when she said, Marcus. I stopped. Why, the camera, she said. This morning. When it happened, she paused. You called it in immediately. Yes, ma'am. You sent the report to the judge's clerk. Yes, ma'am. She looked at me. Thank you, she said. I thought about Cal saying the same two words to him on the courthouse steps this morning. The same weight, the same thing too large to name any other way. Just doing my job, I said. She looked at me like she knew that wasn't entirely true. Thank you anyway, she said. I went back to my post at the front door. The courthouse was quieting into its late afternoon mode. Fewer people, the long light coming through the front windows, the cleaning staff beginning their rounds on the upper floors. Cal came through at 4:20. Work boots on the marble floor, keys in his hand. He'd be driving back to Clarksville. 3 hours, arriving after dark. Whatever version of home waited for him there. He stopped at my station. Long day, I said. Yeah, he said. We stood there for a moment. The courthouse doing its quiet end-of-day thing around us. What happens now? I asked. With Owen. With your family. He thought about it. We figure it out, he said. That's what families do. You figure it out, or you don't, but you try. He looked at the front doors. Owen did the right thing in there today. That matters. Whatever else, that matters. The baby's going to have a good uncle, I said. He looked at me. Something moved through his face that he didn't entirely suppress. Quick, real. Yeah, he said. I'm going to make sure of that. He went out through the front doors. I watched him go down the courthouse steps. The same steps. Different afternoon light on them now. Gold and long and quiet. Nothing like the sharp morning white of 8:47. He went down them steady. The way he'd come up them. I need to tell you what happened 6 months later. Not because the story requires it. The story was done in that courtroom. But because I was there, and because it mattered. It was a Tuesday in March. Cold morning. The kind of cold that Nashville gets in late winter, where you can smell spring coming, but it hasn't arrived yet. I was at my post at 8 o'clock when a car pulled into the parking lot. I watched from the top of the steps. Cal got out of the driver's side. He came around to the passenger side and opened the door. Laurel got out. She was not pregnant anymore. Yeah, she was carrying a baby in a car seat carrier, the small, bundled, impossibly compact presence of a very new person in the world. The baby was maybe 6 weeks old, wrapped in a yellow blanket that someone had clearly chosen with care. Cal carried the car seat. Laurel walked beside him with her hand light on the carrier's edge. They came up the front walk. I stepped forward. "Ms. Briggs," I said. "Good morning?" She looked up and recognized me, and her face did something warm and genuine. "Ish, Marcus," she said. "Good morning." "Back in court," I said. "Just paperwork," she said. "Final custody agreement. 30 minutes, and we're done." "And this is—" I looked at the carrier. Laurel reached in and adjusted the yellow blanket. "This is May," she said. "May Briggs, 6 weeks old, eyes closed, entirely unbothered by Davidson County Courthouse procedure." "She's beautiful," I said. Because she was. Laurel smiled. Real. The first fully unguarded smile I'd seen from her in all the months of this. "She really is," she said. Cal was grinning. The specific grin of a man who is an uncle and has decided this is the best thing that has ever happened to him. "Owen's meeting us inside," Cal said. "He drove up from East Nashville." I looked at him. "How are things?" I said. Cal thought about it honestly, the way he always did. "Better," he said. "Not fixed, but better." He looked at the carrier. "She helps, and having something to show up for helps." They went up the courthouse steps. At the top, Laurel turned back for just a second. She looked at the steps. At the stone where the papers had scattered 6 months ago. Where the red stain had spread through the light blue fabric. Where Cal had crouched beside her and said, "It's already done." She looked at it for just a moment. Then she went inside. I went back to my post. The morning was doing its regular thing. Traffic on the avenue. A clerk coming through with a cart. 2 attorneys in the lobby comparing notes on something. The ordinary machinery of a building that processes human situations continuously and doesn't take breaks. I thought about what Cal had said in the corridor during the lunch recess. A person can love someone and still tell the truth about what they did. I think those things have to be able to exist at the same time, or the truth never gets told about anything. I've worked this post for 11 years. Yeah, I've seen a lot of things happen on these steps. Not many of them stay with me the way that Tuesday in September stayed with me. Not many of them have the specific quality of a day where several people did the hard thing instead of the easy thing, and the hard thing turned out to be the thing that mattered. Cal wrote the letter. Teresa got in the car and drove to Nashville. Owen looked at his brother across a courtroom, and then looked at his wife's face and made a different decision than the one he'd planned to make. None of those things are dramatic in the way movies are dramatic. None of them came with music or a speech or a clean moment where you know the story has turned. They were just choices, made by people in a situation that had no good options, only better and worse ones. Made in the direction of the child in the yellow blanket, who was 6 weeks old and had no idea, and didn't need to, not yet. May Briggs had her first birthday on a Saturday in autumn. Cal drove up from Clarksville with a stuffed elephant the size of a small dog that he'd clearly spent too much on and that May immediately tried to eat. Owen was there. Teresa was there. Laurel's mother drove up from Franklin. So they ate cake on the back porch of the East Nashville house in the late September light, and nobody talked about the courthouse or the letter or the steps. They talked about May, who had her father's jaw and her mother's eyes and had recently learned to pull herself up on furniture and regarded this achievement as the greatest thing anyone had ever accomplished. Which, for that afternoon, it was.